Hello and welcome to episode 383 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now joining me on today's episode is the film critic Alan Jones. I am so in awe of this guy. He has been one of the most influential film reviewers out there, and honestly, I am so impressed with his interview today. We talk so much about his career. He has just released a brand new book called Starburst, which includes the complete Alan Jones film reviews from 1977 all the way to 2008. It's a beautiful hardback book and is available now, and I think after today's interview you'll want to go and check it out because it's absolutely stunning. Alan Jones knows absolutely everything about interviewing and films. He's worked for people like Empire, Total Film. He's reviewed films for BBC News, Radio 4, Sky TV. He's been there and done it all. And the amount of stories he shares with me today and the time we have will blow your mind. And it's such a fun interview. So I think what I want to do now is to get straight to it. So here's me and Alan Jones talking all things film. So Alan, welcome to the Mark and Me podcast.
I'm pleased to be here, Mark. Thank you so much.
Alan, what I do with all guests that come on the show is I do like to take it right back to the very start. So I'm really intrigued. When you were a kid, maybe your first experience of seeing a film, was it in the cinema or with your family at home, or someone gave you a VHS or a Betamax or whatever it was? I wondered what that first kind of experience for you was.
I'm really that old, I'm afraid. I mean, I would go to the cinema in the late 50s and 60s. I'd always go on my own. My parents weren't that interested. I was always drawn to horror. There was, it just was, Hammer films. I've used this story a lot. In fact, I mentioned it in my Nicholas Winding Refn book that I did with him called The Act of Seeing, where the end of my street, I come from Portsmouth,
Yeah.
on the south coast, on the end of my street, there were like a whole raft of billboards. So literally, I walk past them every single day. And back in those days, of course, you'd see Hammer double bills, sexploitation, really lurid sort of posters for everything. And I was just entranced walking past. And the earliest memory I ever had was of the Day of the Triffids poster. And I literally peeled it off the billboard and took it home
I
to pin
love
up
this.
on my wall. And so that's what it was. I don't know where the love of horror sci-fi fantasy comes from, really, but I think it's a lot to do with that. I kept thinking, are these films as good as that?
Yeah.
And the very first time I went to see an X certificate, remember those, you had to be 16 to get in. I had to fake it a bit. I mean, well, I mean, for me, for my generation, that was a rite of passage. You'd going up to the usher, the box office and going, hello, one for Plague of the Zombies, and the woman behind there was sort of like give you the one. So she knew you weren't 16, but they needed the money, so they let you in anyway. So it was a case of that. So, but once I was hooked on Hammer, AIP, Roger Corman films, that was it. It was once a week. I would go every weekend, and that was it.
It's
So
incredible. I remember I was talking about this the other day when people used to buy cigarettes or matches and have little handwritten notes from parents or something saying it's fine to sell these to my son, but I can't imagine the cinema people would be like, yeah, that's fine, go and watch this really bad X-rated film.
And again, they don't do it now, but back then we had Saturday morning pictures, which was a
Yeah.
good way for the parents getting rid of you for Saturday morning, so they'd actually sort of like send you off with your sixpence to get in. It always was like a serial, a cartoon, and then whatever a 10-year-old movie was. And then one of the ones I always remember is like The Day the Earth Stood Still,
Oh,
So
wow.
again, it was those. It was always some Gene Autry fantasy sort of like serial, then Tom and Jerry. And remember Children's Film Foundation movies. God, you don't see those anymore, do you? Thank God they're awful. But I mean, it's a case of, but I always remember that. So very early on, I loved that sort of thing. Had nothing to do with. I read Dennis Wheatley. I read, Bram Stoker. I read all the classics, and so that's one of the reasons why I was. I mean, I didn't really. The very first textbook I ever bought was Carlos Clarence's horror movies, which came out in 1968. And it was like a revelation to me. I read it and I thought, oh, people are actually taking these films seriously. Oh, there's an Italian master of terror called Mario Bava. I really must check him out. So it was all that. So I mean, I was completely sort of enmeshed in it. I always kept diaries of films, everything I saw. One of my Fright Fest guidebooks that I write, we do a guidebook every year for Fright.
Yeah.
Um, I've written two of those, and they're based on my entries from my diaries from those years. In fact, people didn't believe me, so I actually took a photograph of that for the last one, Fright Fest Guide to Grindhouse Movies, just so they could see that I would actually write in teeny writing everything from 1966 until I became a fully fledged film critic. I would keep everything in those diaries.
I'm so glad you still got them because that's the kind
Mm.
of thing that my parents would have thrown away and I'd have just, lost like my old band t-shirts and my early records now
Mark,
and everything.
I've kept everything. You have no idea.
How cool is that though that you still got them all? I mean, that's amazing.
Well, and obviously they were very naive and stupid, but I did in the last book, I did say to people in the intro, I said, see if you can see the one review that I didn't change at all from that period, because one of them really stood up very, very well, and so no one's come back to me about it. But obviously, I had to rewrite them with what I know now.
Yeah.
People tend to forget that when you're in that era of like no internet, no nothing, no, you had to rely on all the sort of like the American import magazines like Famous Monsters of Film and all my favorite Castle of Frankenstein for any information at all. I mean, if you go to that book, you'll see I did a whole pile of them and I sort of focused on the thing. So it was to prove to people that I wasn't just making it up. Okay, the early ones were really terrible, like This Was Good, and
Yeah.
I like Christopher Lee, and can't wait to see the next one. But you know what I mean? But I was 14, 15
I
when
like
that.
what you were saying. It happened for me even in the 80s was that the Saturday morning was kind of like a bit like a play school where you could get, like, my parents would genuinely drop me off. I'd have my, whatever it was, 50p for popcorn. I'd go and see stuff like Back to the Future 2 and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and all this. And that was my experience. That was my kind of, that gave my parents, now looking back, a couple of hours back to themselves. But how good was it that you'd be able to discover these absolute gems and each week have these treats, and it was just part of like the culture. You just wouldn't get that now.
Yeah, well, back in the 60s, also remember the BBC used to have late night double bills on a Saturday night. And it was always stuff that I particularly wanted to see because it was all the old Monsterverse, the Universals and the odd Hammer from 50s here and there. So that was like, I've spoken to a lot of people, um, you know, uh, who sort of like read my stuff very on, and they all had more or less the same experience. It is quite extraordinary how we all grew up from that particular melting pot. We were always sort of like the loners at school, who are reading, the stuff in the background. We're always going to the movies. So really, I was a fanboy before I even knew that what that term was in a way.
What was the? I don't know your full history, and I like that I don't do too much research, so I can discover it in real time
Okay.
meeting you today. But when you were writing these reviews, and obviously, like you said, you wouldn't publish it in the Times or the a film review magazine like "Very good, we'll see again." But I wondered what the turning point was where you actually thought to yourself, "I want to be taken seriously. I want these reviews to be seen by people and actually try and make a job of it."
I can tell you exactly when that was.
Oh,
In the
lovely.
early 70s, I moved to London in 1969, had a series of boring jobs as you do, Carnaby Street. I always wanted to work in, so I did that. But then I ended up working in what is still one of the most sort of like celebrity watering holes in London, which is the Portobello Hotel. Back then, it's in Notting Hill Gate. It was a magnet for every star. Every single person I ever met and stayed friends with comes from that era. I knew everybody. I was hanging around with ABBA, Queen, Jack Nicholson,
Oh, wow.
Ryan O'Neill. I was with, like Antonioni when he made The Passenger.
Oh my
Band, it was
God.
bands, Sadistic Mika Band, Roxy Music. This is a true story, and I've used it in the autobiography. I was the very first person to listen to You're So Vain
Oh my
because
God.
Carly Simon played it to me because she was one of the guests in the hotel.
Yeah.
She said, "What do you think of this song?" I went, "Oh, fantastic!" I had no idea the cultural impact that would have. But I'm cutting forward because that's why the Pistols and I got on really well because I
Yeah.
was to work the night shift. So the Pistols used to come and stay all night with me on speed, so they would actually, and that's where a lot of people saw them for the very first time. And I always remember Mick Jagger coming through the door and going, who are that lot? And he'd never seen them before. This was early. We're talking about 75, 76. And so then, but anyway, so I knew everything. Anyway, one of the guests who stayed at the hotel was a science fiction writer called Harlan Ellison, very famous. He actually wrote a lot of the Outer Limits
Yeah.
episodes in the 60s, very famous at that time for writing a script for Valley of the Dolls, which actually wasn't used. But anyway, he caught me writing my reviews one night and he said, well, let me have a read. And I went, no, no,
No,
no.
get
And
off. Yeah.
so then he read one. He said, actually, this isn't bad. I've got a friend who might be interested. That friend turned out to be a guy called Frederick S. Clark, who was the editor of a magazine in America called Cine Fantastique.
Yeah.
At that time, Cine Fantastique was like the most important magazine in the world. It had access to everything on a fantasy level that you would never get ever. And because my best friend at the time was a producer at Capital Radio, we decided together that we would actually become the London correspondents for this magazine, which we did. And my very, very first two set reports were Carrie, the Brian De Palma
Yeah.
movie, and Star Wars. And the only
Fucking
reason
hell.
and the only reason I got onto Star Wars was because in the hotel, the Portobello Hotel, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill were guests. And they said to me just one day, oh, come onto the set, which I did. And as a result of that, I got to talk to them. I interviewed them. I mean, nobody knew what Star Wars was going to be at that time. And of course, I found myself with literally, like interview gold when the film became the massive success it was. I'm not saying that film um, changed everything. It was just one film in many that I was
Of
actually doing at
course.
that
Yeah.
particular time. But from that moment on, I can literally tell you that I was on every set of every major film made through the late 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, right up until like sort of Fright Fest took over, really. And no, I'm still doing set reports now, but I'm doing them from a that I want to do them. I don't have to do them. And the fact that the whole sort of like magazine landscape and the journalist is
Yeah.
whole landscape's changed doesn't work like that. I would literally, I had Sissy Spacek, the star of Carrie, in a hotel room for an hour. She was rolling a joint, speaking to me, interview. Where would you ever get that now? You get 2 minutes
If
with
that,
the
yeah.
talent, if But I did, some of the films I worked on, Alien, the original, Little Shop of Horrors, The Key. I could just go through everything, but I mean, there's no point. But I did everything. And I got a very, very good reputation as a result of that. And from Cine Fantastique, because it was American based and they didn't need me to review films, because they got them there back in those days, always 6 months in advance if you're.
Yeah.
So I did the reviewing for Starburst, which is why I've put all those reviews of 30 years into the book which is now coming out next week.
Surely you must have been kind of pinching yourself back in the 70s and 80s on set of these films. Did you have that kind of like fear of like, oh my
No,
God, look at
no, I
these
never.
people? Never.
I always say to people, I never had any panic. I've never. The only person I've ever met who has like completely floored me because I was such a fan of hers was Raquel Welch.
Yeah.
She was the one that I loved. I'd always loved her, and meeting her was like a real sort of like I can't speak moment. Everyone else, and it was mainly because of the hotel, because I'd seen these people in the hotel rooms fixing their showers, giving them,
Just
like
doing normal everyday stuff.
yes, everybody from Richard Dreyfuss. I mean, literally everybody stayed in that hotel.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I knew them all. I mean, band wise, I mean, I was at. I can't even. There are so many, Mark. I just
Yeah.
can't begin to tell you. I mean, you name a band from the 70s. I was in the front row of their gigs because
Wow.
they gave me free tickets for everything, so that was it. Blondie, there was a good one. I mean, Debbie Harry loved me, and I saw her very first gig in New York because I was invited over by her stage manager, who was a guy called Tony Ingrassi at that time. He was part of the Warhol set. That's how I met all the Warhol factory
Do you
people.
believe in fate? Because it feels like you're in the right place at the
Yeah,
right
there is
time.
that, isn't it? I mean, it's funny how it works. When I look back, I think I can chart the course. You've got to remember that I was one of the few people doing this.
Yeah.
Nobody understood the job. Nobody was doing this. I would literally call up a film company and go, "Oh, you're making so and so at Pinewood. I'd like to come along and report." And they'd literally go, "Why?" I said, well, don't you want the publicity? And they go, oh, all right then. So in a way, I've in my the Starburst book, I've called myself a pioneer. In a way, perhaps I shouldn't have done it. It's self-aggrandizing, really, but it's true. I mean, I
You were
went
doing
out
something
there.
different, yeah.
Yeah, I forged the career that other people are following now, but I did it first, and I had such a great time. Honestly, it was every week I was somewhere, and back in those days they would fly you to sets. So I was going here to LA to do this movie. I was Fright Night. I was there doing Jaws 3D. Do you know what I mean? So it was all there. I mean, so and you get and also at that time, my close one of my very close friends was Russell Mulcahy, who's the rock video director of literally everything you've ever seen.
Yeah.
He was another entry into a whole level of Hollywood showbiz that I didn't even know existed either. He'd take me to parties in Hollywood, and I'd meet everybody I ever wanted to know. One of my most famous stories is he phoned me up one day and said, I'm taking you to this gig. And I went, oh, okay, then. He said, I'll meet you outside. This limo turned up, got in the back of the limo, and it was Tina Turner, Elton John, me, and Russell.
She'd be like, "Can you
So
prepare me
I
next
thought,
time?"
oh, here we go. But and so I've never ever dealt with that's one of the reasons why people always say that my reviews are really honest and truthful because I'm not phased by people. I'm not one of
No.
the people who say, darling, you're wonderful. Your film's marvelous. I love it. I will tell them the truth. Russell's Highlander 2 was one of the worst films I ever saw. And I reviewed that really badly, and he was really angry with me. And I said, oh, come on, Russell. I mean, you know it's rubbish yourself. Don't give me a hard time over this. And it's been that I've followed that all the way through. I don't care who you are, you can be my best friend. You can be anybody. I will tell you what I think of the movie. And I think that sort of reputation I sort of nurtured gave me all the followers that I actually have
Isn't that
now.
lovely though? Because a lot of people now are either paid or you can see they're being biased or they're trying
Well,
to say,
social influencers,
yeah,
don't get me started on all
no.
that. I mean, I hate them. I mean, unfortunately, the film industry wants those people. They don't want people to be critical anymore. But I was. And one of the things I noticed, the reason why I did the book, I didn't want to do the Starburst review book at all, to be honest with you, because I thought, who needs another review of, Return of the Jedi or Harry Potter? No one. No one wants to read those. But as I went through it from 1977 to 2008, when I stopped, I realized that you could see not only me getting better as a writer, forming a style, a house style as I went on, but you could also see the changes in the genre going through as well, from like stalk and slash to sort of like tent poles to big budget to CGI. You know what I mean? So
But
I
isn't
was
that fascinating, that
yeah,
journey that's been documented now?
yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why I think the book works, not just as a review book,
Yeah.
because I think it's really good. And I just so after all the people saying to me, "You got to do this book of all your reviews," I thought, no, 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 no. Now I've done it. I'm really pleased I did because I can now see it actually is as a historical, not just me. I mean, to be honest with you, I was terrible. I mean, I spoil everything. The plot points I gave away at the early. I don't know how people managed to put up with it, really. And I was so nasty about the things. That was my punk attitude, though. People had always said to me that my punk ethos for working with the Pistols actually transformed
It
through
rubs off on you.
review. Yeah, I mean, I did say some awful things. I mean, I won't say the film, but I did say one of the director of this film should die of cancer because it's so bad.
Wow.
Can you believe I got away with that? Seriously,
You'd
how
be
did the
cancelled
PR,
now, wouldn't you?
right? How did the PR companies ever? But then back in the old days, press shows, it was me, Barry Norman, and one other person.
Yeah.
And no one else in these press shows. Now, of course, you have to queue up for hours to get in. But back then, and you'd go into the previews, the press shows, and there'd be like a buffet, there'd be a steak. It'd be unbelievable. These days, you're lucky if you get a crisp on the way out. Do you know what I mean, though?
No, it's
So,
true.
yeah.
I was wondering, you said you're never phased by anyone you've met. Has it ruined it for you sometimes because you've met someone that you've idolized or has been a hero and then turned out to be an arsehole and it's kind of tainted the showbiz world for you?
No, not because I think once you do that, you become too cynical. I mean, my sort of like career is really tied up with the director Dario Argento in Italy,
Yeah.
um, because he was my favorite. I've always loved his movies. When I met him, I was beside myself. I just thought he was so good. But we just spoke about his movies, his technique and everything. I met him in 1982, and from that moment on, with the film as Tenebrae, from that moment on, we became really good friends, and I was on literally every single set from that moment
Wow.
on. And he was a completely different uh, kettle of fish, really, because I loved watching him. He's one of, you know as well as I do, that being on film sets is the most boring thing ever. After 5 minutes, it's worn
The
off.
showbiz is gone.
Yes, and you're sat there waiting for sort of like people to remember their lines, or hours later, you're still there watching the same scene. I mean, it's not glamorous at all. I mean, look, I love it and it's great. The both best times I've ever had is on the early Muppet shows where I would actually sit on all the filming of those. So I'd see every star coming through the Muppet shows. But with Dario, I was actually so fascinated by how he worked. And that's why, again, I did the Dario Argento book, and I also annotated and edited his own personal autobiography because I mean,
Incredible.
I was never bored by watching him, unlike I have been on other people's sets, and it's bored me rigid. Whereas with Dario, I would always look at him and I could see how he thought. He never used his storyboards, and it was always he was thinking on. I loved it, and I watched him all through his career and right until the last film that he did. So no, that's one of the ways that so I did turn that obsession into like a very lucrative book on his films, and it's still being published now, and so I do very well on that one. Dario, in some ways, has sort of thanked me for sort of not reviving his career, but sort of like showing an interest when it looked like he was going off the boil after Suspiria. I mean, still to this day, people think Suspiria is the film that, he's most famous for. I would argue with that. But I mean, I did extend his career by being so enthusiastic, and he did appreciate that. He's always told me we've had great times together in Rome. Rome is one of my favorite cities. I love it because I've made so many movies there with different people on locations. It's just been so fabulous. So I did the Terry Gilliam film Baron Munchausen, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, if you
Yep.
remember. First, I walked through the door at Cinecittà, the studio there. The first person I met was Fellini. So
It's mind blowing.
you don't where else can you do this? But I think, Mark, in a way, I would never said no to anything. At that time, they did, do you want to go to Russia to do that? Yeah. Do you want to go to Finland to do a Mel Brooks comedy that no one's ever going to see? Yeah. I always said yes. I never, ever, ever turned. I always made a joke to people that from 1971 to 1989, I was never at home. I was always out somewhere around the world doing stuff. I never watched television, never did anything because I was that. I mean, when lockdown happened with the pandemic, people were going, "Oh, what am I going to do?" I said, "What you don't understand is that, if you're a journalist, I was in lockdown all through the 70s and 80s. I literally have to hide myself away, transcribe everything, write all the articles. Sometimes it'd take me 3 months because my full production reports would often be an issues long, and it would take time to do. So, I was used to that when the pandemic came along, let's say that.
Has there been any films, and I've done it before when I've had a other podcast called Skip to the End, which was quite successful, reviewing films, and I wondered if you'd really changed your perspective on a film after a certain amount of time and a second or third viewing and something clicked. So if you could go back, maybe you'd change it because you were too harsh or you were too kind and actually you got it wrong.
Hmm. No, because I think the way I always worked was I would see the film,
Yeah,
I'd come here, I'd write the review,
yeah.
then that's what I felt at that particular time. And I think that you have to stay true to that, don't you?
I
I
love
mean,
it, yeah.
yeah, the revisionism. I mean, I was one of the few people to give Blade Runner like a 5-star review at the time when it first came out. Everyone else hated it. And
Yeah.
it always made me laugh when I saw people scrabbling around 20 years down the line saying, well, of course, I really did think it was quite a nice film after all. I said, no, you didn't, you liar.
You said
You
it was
said
shit,
this.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. I have made mistakes. I mean, one of my favorite films was Howard the Duck. Everyone hated it. But I saw that at the very first preview in Hollywood with George Lucas sat next to me there. So and I loved it, and I really honestly loved it. I wouldn't have said it because it was him, but I did like it because I was taken to task on that for years afterwards because it was like an epic flop. And now they're redoing it, so who knows? My time might come again. I mean, perhaps I did sort of like I was a bit sort of down on a film that's become a classic. I'm trying to think of an example. The Hitcher is a good
Yeah.
example. Because the only reason I'm thinking of that is because at Fright Fest we're showing the full new 4K restoration. I thought,
Second
well,
sight's release, yeah.
yeah. I said, what am I going to? Let me go back to my review of that, and I literally went back to it, and it was like, well, this is okay. So I thought, okay, but that's what I thought at the time. And of course, at that time when The Hitcher came out originally, a million other stalk and slashers had come down the pike, and so you were literally a bit world weary from it all, really, I thought. So again, that's why the book's really good because it places it at a specific time as well. So hey, that's what I think. So no, I will stick by what I said, I think.
With your
Rather,
brain that's been kind of so tuned to reviewing a film, looking at cinematography, looking at editing, looking at the acting, looking at the lighting, looking at every aspect. I'm sure after 3 decades of always reviewing and writing these reviews, you can't now just go to the cinema and just watch a film. Is it always that your brain is right? I need to look at what's going on. I'm reviewing this. I've got this brain that just will not switch off from review mode.
hmm. I always go to see films with reviews in, so in a way, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, because you do, don't you? I mean, you're looking at everything. I mean, as I said with Alien, I can't talk about it at the moment, but you can see what's wrong with it, what's right with it, where it goes. So yeah,
But can you
perhaps.
can you just go and just watch a film without having a reviewer's?
Funnily enough, I can on, say, sort of one of the streaming channels,
Yeah.
and I don't have to think about it, and it's a different environment, and it's on TV.
Yeah.
Yes, perhaps that does work like that. But like The Instigators has just come on for.
Yeah.
I didn't really enjoy it that much, but I thought, I don't have to review it, so let's just sort of like settle down and watch it properly. So there's that, I suppose. People always wonder me why I don't, I can't, when to switch off, I watch crime TV shows. Law and Order being my absolute favorite series of all time. And because I think it's just so different than what I'm doing, because I would never normally review those sort of things anyway. So it's like the complete antithesis to what I do as a daily job, you know what I mean? So that's one of the reasons.
So
But
that's the one thing you can actually
yeah,
just switch off and
yeah,
enjoy.
yeah, I can't read horror novels.
No.
The only Stephen King book I've ever read is Carrie, because I was
Yeah.
doing the film at the time. I find the written horror doesn't interest me, whereas filmed it does. I don't know why, but it's just one of those things. It's just, the reason why I've never drunk alcohol in my life. It's just one of the same things, it's just a lifestyle choice, so I just don't do that. Because people always say, have you read this? Read that? No, I'll read every crime book known to man. Give me a David Baldacci or a Val McDermott, I'll read it in a flash. But I mean, but anything else, Stephen King, not interested, you know.
I was talking to my co-host of my other podcast the other day, and we were talking about films that we haven't reviewed on the show. And he was talking about how Marvel and stuff like this, like Madam Web, is so bad. And he said to me, I actually don't know if we had to do a podcast on that episode or have to review it. I don't actually know what I could talk about because it's not the worst film he's ever seen. It's not great, but there's just nothing to it. So he just said to me, I would probably just be silent because I just have nothing to say. It just washed over me so much. There was nothing. It was just soulless and dead, and there was nothing. And I wondered if there was some films or experiences that you had where it was just such an effort or such work to try and say anything about it because it was just so pointless.
I'm going to say to this because I do a lot of DVD commentaries and I do a lot of writing for sort of like 4K restoration release
Yeah,
stuff like that. I'm going to say no because I can always find something.
yeah.
People, I won't really do a film that I have no interest in, but even if it's something, I mean, I'm just thinking in the past, like I've done so many uh commentaries. Uh I'm trying to think of something that I could give you an example of. The Red Queen Kills Seven Times is a Giallo film from the 70s. Not one of my favorites, but I managed to talk about it for 2 hours because you do. You
Yep.
have look at it, you find it, you get the backstories. So I've never been in a position where I think, oh my God, I can't be bothered to I mean, and what I mean, I'm sure there will be a commentary for Madam Web done by somebody sooner or later, and they will go through everything, and say something about it because I think that's what it is. I mean, the Marvel Universe fans, I'm sure, could drone on forever, like I can about Italian horror. So it's a case of that, I think. I think it's in my DNA to actually be able to find, like, when I interview people, I just did Pierce Brosnan for they're re-releasing Nomads, the
Yeah.
very first John McTiernan movie, and he specifically requested me because he I got on very well with him on the Bond movies he did, and as a result of that, I mean, I literally Nomads isn't one of my particularly favorite films, but you
No.
can sit there and you can talk about everything, and we did an hour long conversation about Nomads. Now, really, when you think about that, most people would find nothing to say about it in 2 minutes and it'd be over. But we could talk about a lot of stuff. And I just thought, I can always, like you doing this podcast, you can always find the angles, Mark.
Of course.
There's always some sort of crevice that suddenly it opens up a whole new seam of information. When I do on stage interviews with Fright Fest, for example, I am prepared. I know what I'm going, I know the questions I want to ask, but if it veers off into another direction, I can go with that. And I think that's where best of the gold comes from, frankly.
Me too, because that's never ever prepped for, and it can go anywhere. It's
Right.
endless. So,
And I think, and sometimes they can say something that will spark. Probably you're doing the same with me now, but I mean that can spark something off that you would never have thought of normally, and takes you into an area that they go, God, I haven't spoken about that for a long time. So it's interesting. I think that's what I've always done in my whole career. I mean, I used to do Sky Television. I used to do all the celebrity interviews for Sky TV, from Mel Gibson to, Sly Stallone to everybody. You name them, I did them. Jim Carrey, George Clooney, everybody. And I always found that it was easier that if I knew what I was doing in the back of my mind, I had like six flawless back questions I
yeah.
could fall on, but then I would just keep it flowing. And I did. And I think that's your interview technique. I don't like people who sort of say something, and somebody suddenly comes up with something interesting, and then they suddenly switch completely. Like, what's your favorite color or
It's
something?
honestly the worst thing I've seen, and I see it at festivals, I see it at Q&As, and it's like they've got a tick list they have to achieve. So it'd be
Right.
like, Alan, tell me about the reason you got into film writing, and you tell me, and they're like, so what's your favorite color? And you're like, did you not listen to all the opportunities that he
Mm.
just gave you to then have a topic and let it just run? And then once you've got back to it, and you're like, oh, so Alien meant a lot to you. So, do you like pizza with cheese or tomato? And I'm like, for fuck's sake, like, just let it go where it needs to go.
That's true. I mean, I mean, this is all honed. It's just down to experience, isn't it? I was, I'm sure I bumbled around in the early times. I mean, what the famous story I always tell is when I did interview Brian De Palma on Carrie. The situation behind that was just so unusual because he was on the way to the airport, and he just said, "Get in the car, uh, talk to me on the way to the airport about anything you want, my career," because I loved his movies. And anyway, we broke down, so we were literally stuck on a highway for like 3 hours,
Fucking hell.
and I literally just talked and talked and talked and talked at him, and he talked and talked and talked back, and that became a really, really important interview for me that's been republished all the
I
time.
was just going to say, is there ever going to be the starburst equivalent of all your interviews?
Well, I'm not sure I can be bothered doing that, to be honest with you. But I mean, I don't know. This took a lot of work. But with that, and of course, De Palma famously being so grumpy and he hates the press. Every time I would see him after that, he would always go, it's you from the limo." And that always made me laugh.
I'm the
But it was
limo
like,
man.
yeah. But I mean, so what I'm saying is, and that stuff. has been you reuse and reuse and reuse because I was that interested in his career. And I think people can tell this. I think people know that you're not. But always people, when I used to do the TV interviews, always said to me, I love you because you're looking at me. You're not
Yeah.
looking at notes. You're not actually looking around because you're just waiting for me to reply. You're actually looking at me and watching me what I'm doing.
I've
And
never took a notebook with me to anyone
yeah,
I've ever met before because I just think it's offensive. I think if you need to write down a
absolutely.
name or a year, I think you can remember those, like you said, six
Absolutely.
questions or something that's vital. I think if you're sitting reading off a pad, you might as well fucking email at them and just wait for the answers to
I
come
agree with you
back.
entirely. And I mean, and that sort of again sort of cemented my reputation in many ways. When people again would request me specifically to do those interviews. And I had some really, really fantastic people. Sky eventually actually sort of like erased them all, which I thought I couldn't believe it. As soon as Barry Norman came along, he erased everything. And I thought, God, all that footage that was gold, but hey,
Was
that's
there
what
one? I mean, I've only been interviewing for 7 years, but one of my early ones was Corey Feldman, and I went in and I was ready with a whole kind of ideas of I want to talk about Goonies, Gremlins, Lost Boys, all the 80s films. And it threw me off because I said to him, talk to me about growing up in the film industry. And he said, look, I only want to talk about my music, my album. And have you ever seen his performance or his albums or listened to his music? I don't know why you'd want to talk about it. You know, it's a joke. And it threw me off so much. I was kind of like, I never was ready for kind of plan B. I know you should have been, but it's very early into my career. And I wondered if you had any experiences where you were just completely thrown off course, that you were just drowning.
Sometimes people can sort of like not respond to your questions that well. Um, I've done a lot of BAFTA,
Yeah.
uh, Oscar interviews with major talent for when they're promoting the films for their Oscar performances, and I've done a lot of those. And I always remember it was Stephen Frears, and I said to him, I said to him, oh, you said this and this and this. No, I didn't. I said, yes, you did. It's in the press. How dare you say you didn't do that? And and of course, that you can't really say that because it makes them look silly because you're there to actually promote their career. But I mean, it's a case of so there are things like that where you grit your teeth and think, you don't know what you're talking about, mate. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Just get on with it. So, but I mean, the most I think the most incredible experience with an interview I ever did
Yeah.
was when I went to the Venice Film Festival and Harrison Ford asked me to interview him
Wow.
on stage, and I
That's my
went, "Oh,
dream.
okay." But I knew him for a while back in the 70s anyway. I liked him. And I said, "Okay." But I didn't realize we were going to be in front of like about 50, 10,000 people in a stadium. I did not know that. And so when I walked out on that and I saw all these people, I had about 5 minutes of like, oh my God. But oh, come on, it's either one person or 50, so it doesn't matter.
Just
So,
breathe. Yeah.
so we just did it and it was great. And in the end, he said, you did a good job. So, there were those things. I think so. I've never really been, some of these BAFTA interviews have been incredible actually, because you're there on stage. I'm thinking of Emma Stone with La La Land particularly, and you're looking out at the audience, and you're seeing Leslie Caron, Brad Pitt, and you're all sitting in the front row, and you're going, "Oh my God, they're looking," So you're just wondering,
I
what
bet you
they're
have to just tell
thinking.
yourself not to
Yeah,
digest what's happening.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I mean, what else do you do? I think it's that. As back to never being phased by anybody really.
Is there, and I know it's an obvious question, but I'm very intrigued. Is there still a name on a list that you need to tick off before you die that would be, okay, I've interviewed this person now and I feel like I've fucking done it.
Not really. I've interviewed everybody.
I was going to
In
say,
fact,
is there anyone you haven't interviewed?
actually, there is Tom Cruise. I've never interviewed.
Ah,
For some reason, it's just one of those things. But everybody else, really, literally everybody else.
have you interviewed Cameron Crowe?
No.
There you go.
But why would I want to interview Cameron Crowe?
Almost famous,
And there's that.
which
But I
is your
mean,
life by the sounds of it.
uh, well, who knows? I mean, listen, I won an award. Look at my
Look at
award.
that.
I'm now a critically acclaimed writer.
For the listeners out there, that's one of the best looking awards I've ever seen.
The Rondo Award, but named after the Rondo Hatton, who was the horror star in the 30s.
Yeah, that looks amazing.
Because I did a series, I was going to do a book on Guillermo del Toro's career back in the early 2000s. I interviewed him non-stop for days on end, and it didn't work. So I dug out all the interviews recently. I put them in a magazine called The Dark Side, and everyone loved them. Even he did.
I
So
met him at the BAFTAs and I said to him, I'm going to interview you one day. And he gave me his agent and his press manager, and it never happened. But I thought to myself, I would love just to talk about, the practical filmmaking and all the figures and all the stuff because the time he puts in is unbelievable.
yeah, I mean, we knew him better. I knew him better back then. Now
Yeah,
I'm the Oscar winner that he is. I don't. We haven't really come across each other much, but I did Hellboy and Hellboy 2 on set.
yeah.
Those were great to do, and he was lovely on those. He's a really nice man. I like him a lot. Anyway, he loved these interviews, and people did, and I got an award for it. So there you go. I had a word with Mark Kermode this morning, and I said to him, I said, I've won an award, and I said, darling, I've won 4 Sonys, whatever they are. I think that's because of his. Is that a podcast award thing?
It
Is that
must be. I've never heard of it.
what he said? I've got 4 Sonys. I'm like, oh, okay.
Wow. Unless he's on about his TVs. So you've got a busy rest of the year. Obviously, Starburst will be officially launched at Fright Fest. You've got Fright Fest, another book in the works. You're a busy
Yeah,
boy.
I mean, well, I've also got. I'm going to Motel X, which is a Portuguese Lisbon, which is a Portuguese fantasy festival. Know them very, very well. All the fantasy festivals are in a federation,
Yeah,
and I'm going there to talk about actually the books as well. I did promise to talk to them about Discomania, which is the title of the
yeah.
autobiography, because they wanted that, and I hadn't actually withdrawn the title until later, and it was all put into place, and I thought I can't not get out of it. And then, of course, I do the Trieste Science Plus Fiction Festival in Italy, which is another one of my gigs. I'm artistic director of that, so that takes a lot of time in October.
Do you ever sleep, Alan?
Oh, I wish I did at the moment. Who knows? So, but no, I mean, listen, what am I going to do? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, my job is great. I mean, I've never had a terrible time. I'm doing what I love. Why am I going to stop that? I'm probably going to drop dead in the middle of an interview on stage, I've decided.
What a way to
I
go,
mean,
though.
yeah, well, there's that. But I mean, it's a case of what am I going to do? You know?
You're truly an inspiration. You know what I'm doing. You know how I work. You know that I'm following this path, and there's not many people that have done what you've done. So if I can get a tenth of what you've done, I'll be fucking.
I'm
I'd die
busier
happy.
now than
Yeah.
I've been in my life. That's the weird thing, to be honest with
What a
you.
dream.
And I'm doing what it's good. I hope people like the book. I really do. I
It
think they
looks
will.
beautiful. I mean, off camera and off the podcast, you've shown me
Yeah.
what it looks like, and
Of course, you've read. I sent you some of the stuff tonight.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen previews, but my God, like it's that book you need at home, on the coffee book table in your
Well,
collection that people can just pick up at any point, go onto any page, and I think it's a fucking encyclopedia for anyone that wants to review films.
do you think so? Do you think people are so used now just to going onto like IMDb and finding out stuff from there?
Nah, this is what the
Do you think
one thing I
people want
will
the hard
say,
copy?
everyone's going digital with music from Spotify. Some people are still buying vinyl. No one really buys many DVDs, but a decent looking, beautiful book that's got its heart, put into it, and that hologrammy kind of silver effect you've got, that is I want to buy that and I want to give that the time it deserves.
Well, thank you. Well, let's hope we're doing well with it pre-order wise. I'm being told by my publisher, and of course, it'll all come you know, to a head at Fright Fest. I've got 2 book signings, one on the Friday, one on the Saturday. So let's see how it goes. It should work, I think. We've got the magazine Starburst, of course,
Yeah.
has endorsed it. I did actually tell them, I said, if you either endorse this or you don't. If you don't endorse it, I'm putting all my other reviews from all my magazines in it, and you'll never get your brand on the cover. So that's what they suddenly saw the sense of that. And we put an advert in the back for
Yeah.
them as well. I mean, Starburst, the magazine represents, which was a Marvel magazine back in the day.
Massive. Yep.
Stan Lee was my boss in a way. So I mean, It's still out there. It's still going strong. I mean, it doesn't have like quite the personality that it used to have when I did it, of course, but it's still out there. And and I just hope people like it.
I've got two more questions for you today. One really
Well,
simple. Are you seeing a certain band playing over the next few days? Wink, wink. A band that means a lot to you with a different singer?
no, I'm not because I've got too much else to do.
I was expecting you to be at the front row going, yeah,
Really?
You're not going.
No.
Oh, that won't feel right, you not being there.
Ah, please. Those days. Ah, hey, hey.
And what I do on this podcast is every guest gets the same final question. I think you'll struggle with the choice because there's so much to choose from, but every guest that comes on gets to choose the final piece of music or song that's played after today's interview. So I'll edit it, I'll make it sound beautiful, and then as it finishes, you get to choose the song that's played, and it can be any song that means a lot to you.
Yes, sir, I can boogie Baccarat.
Fucking, that's the quickest response I've had in 7 years. Most people are like, oh, I've got it down to 10, or why that song, my friend?
Um, One of the very first disco songs. It's still fabulous today as it ever was. It still sounds fresh as ever. I've seen Baccarat so many times sing it. Um, it's a Eurovision. They went to Eurovision. It's everything that I love about disco. It's camp. It's funny. It's so beautiful. It's moving. It's badly sung. It's not badly sung. It's badly enunciated.
Yeah.
They're Spanish, but that's for me is the charm of literally the whole disco period in a
I can't
nutshell.
wait to hear this play now after our chat.
And I love it. And for me, and also you hear it in everything now. I mean, it was played in three Cannes films just gone. I
That's
mean, the Cannes film,
crazy.
literally, it was in three movies. And it's like the easiest way now to summon up that sort of era is to use that song, even in adverts.
Yeah.
And so literally, I mean, that way there are so many I could use, but I'm not going to be boring. But that to me, that would sum up myself. Absolutely.
Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I can't wait to physically have the book in front of me, not a PDF or not an email document. I can't wait to actually, because it's the weight of it, everything about it, like it's insane. The amount that people get for their money is it's
50
just
quid,
unbelievable.
50
Yeah.
pounds. Yes. Fabulous.
Something like, is it something like 650,000 words or something? It's
Yeah. Yeah. It's the
crazy.
biggest book my publisher's ever done. And he's done it with such care and lavish. I mean, I love it. It's great. Promise me you'll come back and talk to me about the autobiography, which is really important to me. Okay, Mark?
Massively.
Promise
When
me.
do you want to do it?
I don't know. We'll decide.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and Alan Jones, someone I respect and look up to, and I'm so influenced. He has literally been there and met and interviewed some of the world's biggest names. It blows my mind today with the stories that he shared on this podcast and some of the incredible things he's done in his life. Honestly, I would love to do some of the things he's done, and I'm so grateful for Alan for coming on the podcast and sharing these incredible stories that he's had within the film industry. As I said at the start of today's interview, Alan's book is out now. It's called Starburst. Go and check it out because it's absolutely wonderful. It's such a beautiful looking book. It's got so much thought, heart in it. And it's just one of those books that you want to have around just to dip in whenever you want to see his views on the world's biggest movies. I hope you've all enjoyed today's episode, and what I ask of you, if you have enjoyed it, is to share it. You know the score by now, everyone. This podcast will always remain free. I make sure it's not full of adverts, and the only way I can do that is to get more people listening. So if you have enjoyed today's episode, please hit the share button on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. It gets the name out there and gets a whole new audience listening to Mark and me. And honestly, to keep the bills going, I do have to have a Patreon. It costs a lot of money to host this podcast and travel the country to do these interviews for you guys at home. The link is on markandme.com. It's very cheap. It's literally a couple of pounds a month. And I make sure that you're rewarded very heavily for your support on Patreon. Now, I just want to give a big shout out to the sponsor of the podcast, Richer Sounds. Without those guys, I couldn't keep doing this podcast. So if you're in the market for a brand new TV or a home cinema surround sound system or a vinyl deck or whatever you want to do in audio and visual, make sure you visit Richer Sounds or go on their website, richersounds.com. I'll be back in only a couple of days' time with another brand new episode. So until then, look after yourself, take care, and I'll speak to you all very soon.
stare. Your eyes are full of hesitation. She makes me wonder if you know what you're looking for. Baby, I wanna keep my reputation. I'm a sensation. You try me once, you'll beg for more. Very much like talking, no, neither walking. You wanna know if I can dance? Yes, sir. Already told you in the first verse and in the chorus, but I will give you one more chance.